It feels like we're living in a time where connection seems more important than ever, but sometimes harder to find.
Absolutely. There's this rising, division, discontent. You see it mentioned a lot.
Right. And it makes you ask, what can we actually do? Like, what really helps build more understanding, maybe foster a bit more us instead of just me?
Well, that's exactly why this study we're looking at today feels so timely.
Okay.
It's research that explores if cultivating our own inner state through mindfulness might actually ripple outwards, affect compassion, maybe even prejudice.
Interesting. So mindfulness having social effects, not just personal ones. Tell us about the study itself. Who was behind it?
Sure. It was Shelley and Aikman from the University of North Georgia, Paul Verhaeghen from Georgia Tech School of Psychology, and Nilam at Stanford Psychology Department.
Okay. Quite the team.
Yeah, and their work was published just this year, February 2025, in the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry. Their main goal was essentially to see if an 8-week mindfulness program could boost well-being and how we relate to others.
Right, the me and the we. So how did they set it up? What was the method?
They used a randomized control trial, a really solid approach. They recruited 190 college students.
Okay.
And randomly put them into 2 groups. One group did this 8-week online mindfulness thing called the Mindfulness Institute for Emerging Adults, or MIEA.
MIEA, got it. And the other group?
They're a waitlist control.
Yeah.
So they didn't get the mindfulness program during the study, basically acting as a baseline for comparison.
Makes sense. And they measured things multiple times.
Exactly. 3 points before the program started, kind of midway through, and then right at the end to track any changes.
So what were they actually measuring? What were the key variables?
They focused on 4 big areas. First, mental health, things like anxiety, depression. Second, well-being, sort of general life satisfaction.
Okay.
Third, compassion, like feelings of concern for others. And fourth, measures related to prejudice, or rather the lack of prejudice, which they considered a kind of pro-social outlook.
Mental health, well-being, compassion, and lack of prejudice.
Got it. So the big question, what did they find after the 8 weeks?
Well, the results were pretty positive for the mindfulness group. They showed significant improvements in mental health, in well-being, and in compassion when compared to the control group.
That's encouraging. And these changes were noticeable.
Yeah, what's really interesting is that these bumps, these improvements, were already apparent by the midpoint just 4 weeks in, and they continued to increase by the end of the full 8 weeks.
Wow, okay. So benefits showing up relatively quickly and growing.
Yeah.
But you mentioned 4 areas. What about prejudice? Did mindfulness move the needle there?
That's where it gets a bit more complex. While they saw those clear gains in the first 3 areas, the intervention didn't seem to produce statistically significant changes in the measures they use for prejudice.
Huh. So compassion went up, but prejudice didn't really go down, according to their measures. That seems slightly counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does a bit, yeah. And digging into the compassion finding, there's another fascinating layer.
The increase in compassion happened, even though the specific compassion-focused practices, like loving kindness meditation, they weren't introduced until week 6.
So 2 whole weeks before the end.
Right. Which kind of suggests that maybe the core mindfulness practices themselves, just paying attention to your breath, your body, the present moment, might inherently cultivate some compassion, almost like a side effect.
So tuning inwards could subtly make you outwardly focused or connected?
That seems to be the implication here. But, crucially, they didn't find what you might call a cascade effect.
Cascade effect, meaning?
Meaning that the improvements in mental health and well-being didn't statistically predict the rise in compassion. It wasn't like feeling better automatically led to feeling more compassionate in this study's data. The changes seem somewhat separate.
Okay, so they happen concurrently, but one didn't necessarily cause the other based on their analysis.
Precisely. But there was another finding that really stood out. It was almost the opposite of what you sometimes hear, like the Matthew effect, where the rich get richer.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
They found that the participants who started the study with the lowest scores on mental health, well-being, and compassion, they actually showed the biggest improvements after the mindfulness intervention.
Wow, that's actually really hopeful. So it suggests that for you listening, if you're perhaps struggling a bit more in those areas, mindfulness might offer the most significant benefits.
Exactly. Those who seem to need it most gain the most. And the researchers highlighted this, suggesting that these kinds of interventions could be really valuable from a public policy perspective, too.
How so?
Well, given the concerns about division and cruelty we started with, having a tool that potentially boosts individual resilience and empathy, especially for those facing more challenges, seems pretty important.
Definitely something worth considering, but like with any study, we should probably touch on limitations, right? Anything we need to keep in mind.
Yes, absolutely. The researchers themselves pointed out a couple of things. One was about how they measured prosociality, specifically that lack of prejudice part. Their measures were based on general attitudes towards groups. They suggested that maybe the link between mindfulness and prosocial behavior might be stronger or clearer if you look at interactions with specific known individuals, not just broad group attitudes.
Right, like how you treat someone you actually know versus a general feeling about a group. That makes sense.
Yeah. And the other thing, the sample, these were all college students, emerging adults. So we need to be a bit cautious about generalizing these exact findings to, say, older adults or different populations.
Okay, fair points. The way you measure something complex, like prejudice matters, and the specific group studied matters.
Definitely. And it kind of leads us to a final thought to leave you with.
Right.
Given this study suggests mindfulness training can boost compassion, even if it wasn't the main focus for most of the program. What does that imply? Could cultivating our own mindfulness be like a foundational step, something that prepares the ground for a more compassionate outlook, even if it doesn't instantly dismantle those really deep-seated prejudices about groups?
So maybe it's not a direct fix for prejudice, but it builds the capacity for empathy first.
Perhaps. It certainly makes you think, doesn't it? How might focusing inwardly on your own awareness subtly shift how you understand and connect with the people around you? Something to mull over.